That's everyone. So, as I say, my name's Roz. I'm one of the solicitors here at Cycle Law Scotland, and thanks very much for asking me to come and speak to you today. And I'm grateful for you all coming to see me and to hear me speak on a Friday afternoon. It's particularly timely to have a conversation like this because it is National Road Safety Week. And certainly, I suppose the reason why you're here is that you might have concerns about cycling and about the safety of cycling. Perhaps the other reason you're here is much the same reason as I am, is because I love cycling. And that's something that we find really important to us at Cycle Law Scotland, is that we're all cyclists ourselves. So, as I say, I've been a solicitor here at Cycle Law Scotland for 4 years now. And we all like different types of cycling. All our lawyers here are different types of cyclists, and you'll see me getting humiliated here by some teenagers racing at the track at Loch Kelly. I mostly do road cycling and a bit of racing. My colleague Thomas is an elite enduro rider, and that's him getting some air on his mountain bike. We've got Rod and our senior partner Brenda, and must have a stronger marriage than I do in order to be able to tolerate each other on a tandem, and Jodie, our other partner, who's a keen cyclist as well. So we're all mad for bikes, as well as being specialist solicitors. So at Cycle Law Scotland, we're a civil law firm, and we represent cyclists involved in accidents when out on their bikes. And many of our clients are cycle commuters, using their bicycle as a form of transport to get from A to B. But also many are cycling for sport or for exercise. Now, as I say, at Cycle Law Scotland, quite often if we do events and we meet people out and about, and they'll say, well, what is it? What is the law then? As if there is a single law that applies to all of cycling. And there isn't. There's many laws, many different types of laws that apply to cycling and how you should cycle out and about. So the primary law that applies is the same that applies for anyone that uses the road, and that's the Highway Code. And it's the type of thing that you might have studied when you were going to pass your test, but not really thought to look much more at it since. And it's important that perhaps you do. And the reason for that, I'll just admit a few more people. There we go. And the reason for that is there's some specific rules that apply to cyclists, but also there's some specific rules that have changed recently. So back in January 2022, there was a change in some of the rules, which didn't really change very much about how cyclists should act, but it gave a different emphasis to how cyclists should be protected and should be respected. It gave a different hierarchy to different road users based on their ability to cause harm. And it also gives a bit more clarity about the amount of space that cyclists should be given on the road. So at Cycle UK, they produced what was quite a good video, just highlighting some of those changes. And I'm hopefully going to display that to you just now. See if this works.
The Highway Code is changing to help make our roads safer for everyone and reduce road deaths and injuries. Here are 4 things you should know about these changes. There is a new hierarchy of road users. Those in charge of vehicles that can cause the greatest harm in the event of a collision have the greatest responsibility to take care and reduce the danger they pose to others. Pedestrians, especially children, older adults, and people with disabilities, are most at risk in a collision, so they're at the top of the hierarchy. But all road users still have responsibility for their own safety. It's just that under the new rule, a driver of a lorry has more responsibility for the safety of others than a child crossing the road. Cyclists have greater responsibility than pedestrians, but less than drivers of motor vehicles, who are more likely to cause serious harm in any collision. This rule aims to make our roads safer, particularly for the most vulnerable road users. Along with the other changes, it will also be relevant in criminal or civil cases following any collision. Drivers are now advised to leave at least 1.5 metres when overtaking cyclists, and even more space in bad weather, at night, or if travelling at over 30 miles per hour. If it is not possible to pass leaving that much space, drivers should wait behind until it is safe to overtake. To avoid confusion about priority at junctions, there is now a new simple rule. If you're turning at the junction, you have to give way to people going straight ahead, unless traffic signs or signals indicate otherwise. That means a driver turning left has to give way to anyone cycling or walking on their left, and not cut across them. And a cyclist turning left has to give way to pedestrians, including someone about to walk across the road at a side junction. This change will make our junctions safer by reducing left-hook collisions, and reflects a cultural change to both priority and responsibility on our roads. Whether you've been driving or a passenger, you must make sure you don't hit anyone when opening your car door. Check for cyclists and other traffic by looking around and using your mirrors, and open the door using your hand on the opposite side, so your left hand to open a door on your right side. This Dutch reach method makes you turn your head to look over your shoulder before opening your door, and helps you avoid hitting anyone. All the changes are designed to help save lives and make getting about more pleasant. You can read through the official highway code here and find more information on our website.
So it mentions in that video, about getting 1.5 metres from drivers, which I don't think has really been is certainly not reflective of what I see cycling. It's not really changed things. And whilst I think many cyclists might be aware of these changes to the highway code, I think perhaps drivers might be less aware of these changes. So again, it mentions about how cyclists going straight forward at a junction will have priority over drivers, so that to avoid left hook incidents. Equally, I personally would be reluctant to rely on that legal right, and I would always want to be really clear that if somebody is signalling to turn left in front of me, that they are aware and are going to give way to me. As I say, there's one thing having the legal right to proceed forward, and then there's the other thing as being trying to avoid the accidents, which I think unfortunately we do have to ride defensively because we are so vulnerable as cyclists. One of the things that was mentioned in the video was about the division between criminal law and civil law. And criminal law is one side of things. There's few circumstances where a cyclist would be found guilty of a crime when riding a bike. It's relatively rare. There are some specific rules relating to cyclists, and there are some specific criminal offences. As I say, it's incredibly rare, but things like dangerous cycling, careless and inconsiderate cycling, cycling under the influence of drink or drugs, and there's some other rules relating to electric bikes as well. If there is a criminal case, then the police can investigate and pass it to the procurator fiscal. Equally, as well as criminal charges being brought against cyclists, it's much more likely that there might be criminal charges brought as a result of a collision where the cyclist has been the victim. And in those circumstances, the police would investigate and pass it to the procurator fiscal for consideration of charges. These charges might be things like careless driving, dangerous driving, death by careless driving, death by dangerous driving. That criminal side of the law is somewhat different to what I deal with. I deal with civil law, which is separate to the criminal law. The criminal law is determined by, or is pursued by the procurator fiscal, by the state on behalf of the Crown, or in the Crown's name, and it's based on a presumption of innocence, so innocent until proven guilty. It's and it's somewhat different to what I deal with, which is civil law. So civil law is, as I said, the law between persons, and it's based on the balance of probability and primarily negligence. So I deal with incidents usually between a cyclist and another road user. Sometimes the incidents that I deal with relate to no other road user, but instead perhaps there's been a road defect or some other dangerous issue with the road that has caused my client to have an accident. As a civil lawyer, I'm obliged to gather evidence in order to prove fault, to prove negligence, and it's required that I can prove that there is a duty of care and that there's fault that has been that has happened, and for that reason that my client is entitled to compensation. So some of the regular and more common cycling collisions that I deal with are dooring, where somebody would open a door into my client that's passing, roundabouts, at junctions, whether that's a junction to the left or perhaps a vehicle that's traveling towards my cyclist client and turning right ahead of them, or sometimes even close passes. And I'm going to give you some examples of some of the cases that I've dealt with so that you can understand a little bit more about, as I say, the common incidents that we see and the common issues that we deal with as as civil lawyers acting on behalf of cyclists that have been injured. So this is an accident that happened to one of my clients in Edinburgh, and she was cycling along here up this cycle path towards an advanced stop line at traffic lights. Now, just as in this photograph, the traffic was stationary to her right, but she has a cycle lane that she could travel up and towards the traffic lights. And as she was proceeding along, all of a sudden, the front passenger door in a car that was to her right and was stationary flew open, and she cycled into the inside of the door. Now, what is quite common in these types of accidents is lots of facial injuries and especially dental injuries. And unfortunately, that's what's happened to my client. She went headfirst into the inside of the door, and she had some very nasty dental injuries with teeth being knocked out and damaged and having to be later removed. What happened in the immediate aftermath? So she had gone into the inside of the door, fallen off her bike, and it appeared, I'll just let somebody in. Hello, Kerry, apologies, you've come in halfway through. As she'd cycled forward, she'd come off her bike, she fell off. It seemed that the person that had exited the car was a teenage boy. It was a high school child dressed in a school uniform. And his mother leaned out of the window, passed her some tissues to deal with her face, which was bleeding, and said that she would just park up round the corner and they could, swap details and deal with things. But what actually happened was that the car drove off, and basically my client was left there bleeding alone and needing to arrange for assistance by herself. Thankfully, some nice passers-by stopped to help her, because you imagine you can feel quite vulnerable at that time. So because the car had driven off and my client didn't at that point have, the opportunity to write down the registration number or any details of the driver, all she could tell the police was what she could remember about the school uniform of the boy that was coming out the car. And from that, they were able to identify which school the boy must have been going to. And they the police made investigations with the school and were able to track down the driver and pass on the driver's name and insurance details to our client, and we were able to make a claim on her behalf. So we were able to make a claim to the insurers for the vehicle, and the insurers for the vehicle are responsible because the driver is responsible for their passengers opening the door. Even if it is their passengers, it's deemed that the driver is responsible for all the passengers in their car. So we were able to make a full claim for this client, and were able to make a full recovery for injuries. She was off work for some time. She also needed to have some dental work, and also lots of dental work into the future, because some of her teeth were knocked out and the titanium implants that they can do need to be replaced over time. So it ended up being quite expensive dental work that she would need for the rest of her days. So as I say, dooring's one of the quite common incidents. The new highway code has asked us to consider when you're exiting a car to use the Dutch reach, so use your opposite hand to open the door, and it forces you to look behind. It's worthwhile doing that whenever getting into the habit of doing that whenever you're exiting a car. But also as a cyclist, unfortunately, there's only so much you can do, but things you can do is also obviously to give stationary cars as much space as possible, to have half an eye on wing mirrors as well, because sometimes you can see if there's somebody inside the car if you're cycling up alongside it, to try and protect yourself as much as you can, whilst the duty is on the driver to make sure that passengers aren't exiting. Again, you just don't want to find yourself in that situation in the first place. So one of the next accidents I wanted to speak to you about, if this is going to work, please work. There we go. This is an accident up in Aberdeen that one of my clients happened. I'm quite often asked about the requirement to have lights when you're cycling. There is no requirement to have lights on your bike during the day, but at night time you are required to having a white light on the front of your bike, which can be flashing, and a red light on the back of your bike, again, which can be flashing. So this is my client Dennis, who was cycling at night time in Aberdeen, and he's an amazing man. He's advanced in his years, but he's still out running masters, marathons, all sorts of ultra runs, trail runs, and he loves his bike. He's just mad for cycling as well. So he's some chap. He was cycling back home one evening in Aberdeen, and he was cycling through this roundabout, and he was going to be going straight forward onto, this is Rosemount, and he had right of way because he was already established on that roundabout to go straight forward. He did have lights on his bike. He had a front light on his bike and also a rear light on his bike, and both were operating at the time. And this area is well street lit. It's in the city centre. There's street lighting all around. All the roads are street lit in this area. As he was cycling through this roundabout and going through, which he couldn't have been going at much speed because it is all uphill. This whole road is uphill. The roundabout is almost on an uphill in the direction he was travelling. A car entered the roundabout and struck him broadside on. So he was knocked off his bike. He had immediate pain in his hip, and it turned out they'd actually fractured his hip and needed a hip replacement in order to deal with that injury. But as he was on the ground, and before the driver came out, Dennis's first thought was, I better turn off my lights and save the battery on my bike lights. So he had popped off his bike lights whilst he was lying on the ground, so as not to waste the battery on them. And the driver believed that he hadn't been using working lights at the time. Now, Dennis utterly disagreed with this, and he was quite confident he was able to show to us that the lights were working. They had battery, but he had just turned them off by the time that the driver had come out of his car to have a look. The police arrived and found the lights to be working. They tested them to make sure that they were working. But in any event, even if they weren't working, this is a street lit roundabout. There's no reason why the driver shouldn't have seen Dennis coming, even if he didn't have lights on. And even worse, the driver hit Dennis sideways. So even with lights, it's quite, the lights aren't going to be visible sideways. So it's not an excuse that even if he didn't have lights on, there would still be a possibility of making a claim, although the amount of damages might be reduced somewhat. That being said, despite some arguments from the insurers on the other side, we were able to make a full claim for Dennis, and that included damages for his injuries, and that takes into account his injuries, so his recovery requiring the surgery, and his slow return, and he's back running marathons now, I understand, and obviously the repairs to his bike as well, which he was concerned about. One of the other things that sometimes people ask me about is it helpful to ride with a helmet camera or some other GoPro camera on their bike? And It is, again, you're not required to ride with any sort of video cameras on your bike, and it's up to you whether you choose to do so. I find it's often commuting cyclists that will choose to ride with helmet cams on. And it can provide really useful information for if the worst should happen and you are involved in an accident. So the next few cases I've got to tell you about involve situations where my client have been able to show me the video of what actually happened to them because they've caught it on their own camera. So this is my client that lives in a commuter town called West Hill, just outside Aberdeen. He was cycling home. He works for the NHS and he's a dedicated cyclist. Day, night, basically, unless it's all frozen over, he will be cycling to and from work. And he is here just cycling along. He's actually very close to where he lives now, so he's nearly at the end of his journey. I'll press play on the video and we can see what happens. And I'll talk you through it as well. So he's cycling along here. You can see the flashing light together with the static light. He had both on. He's checking behind him. There's a junction to his left. The car is there. It's coming to a stop and then it just pulls straight out. I always find that one a bit shocking because, and I'll play it again. I don't know how the driver comes to a stop and then still doesn't see him. So as I say, checks behind him, he's moving out to the middle of the road to make himself more visible, and the driver pulls straight out. The excuse that was given from the driver, say it's an excuse, the reason was given from the driver is that she had her kids in the back of her car and they were screaming and it distracted her. In this circumstance, my client here, I think, really did everything that he could have possibly done. He was wearing high-vis clothing. Again, you're not obliged to wear high-vis clothing. It's certainly a good idea if it is dark to wear bright or reflective clothing. He had all the lights on, including a flashing light on the front of his bike. And as he approaches this junction, he's moving out of what is the cycle lane there, more into the primary position in the middle of the road. It gives him greater visibility and gives him greater room for manoeuvre. There's nothing else that he could have done there. He suffered really nasty injuries. Again, he had gone sort of face first, unfortunately, into the tarmac, and his teeth had gone through his lips, so he needed stitches into his lips. And it took him a good long time to get back onto the bike and back to enjoying the bike. Again, I think there's something particular about cycling that if you are involved in an incident, it does seem to knock your confidence somewhat, and it can be quite difficult to get yourself back on the horse, back on the bike. But he is now, I'm glad to say, back on the bike. I see him on Strava, knocking out those miles, and he's always a great one for giving a thumb on Strava. So I'm really pleased that he was able to get back out there, having had a full claim for compensation paid by the insurers. This is another incident. It happened in Aberdeen, and I wanted to show you the difference between what I understand had happened, and I wonder if I've still got the video. Have I deleted it? Oh no, I have. My apologies. I think I'm missing the slide with the video of what actually happened, but I'll explain it to you all the same. So my client was cycling this way on King Street in Aberdeen, and this is the diagram drawn by the driver of the car that was involved in the collision with my client, who was the cyclist. So the driver drew this image for us and explained that her car was stationary, away to turn right into this road here. And the point of the collision, the cyclist was travelling at speed with no visibility clothing. And what actually, so liability was denied by the insurers for this driver because the insurer said that she was stationary and that my cyclist client had simply cycled directly into her stationary car. Now, I wish I had the video to show you that it was quite different to what actually happened, because we have the video footage again from a client who was able to show that the car was not stationary at all and simply turned through traffic directly into his path, and there was nothing that he could do. And again, only having that video footage from his helmet cam certainly made being able to prove his case an awful lot easier. Because we are working on the balance of probabilities, it can be difficult if there isn't witness evidence. If there is witness evidence, of course, we can take statements from the witnesses to the incident. But again, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So if there's pictures, photographs, or even better, video, then that's really helpful. One of the last types of accidents that we often deal with are close passes. And these are interesting because it isn't always a collision that's involved. So this is one where, again, I have a video of the incident, which happened up north near Peterhead in Aberdeenshire. And it's a client that I dealt with. So this is a video that's going to be from his rear camera. The camera is fitted to the back of his seat post on his bike. And he's had this camera for a number of months because he was fed up of being closely passed by all these vehicles round about whenever he was going out training. Now, my client Tommy here is an amazing man. He does suffer from a mobility issue involving his muscles. And so he finds that cycling is a great way to keep him active, to keep him mobile, and to keep his muscles supple. And in fact, he's a grand club rider. He rides time trials. He rides with a local club and races indeed with a local club. So he's out and about on his bike all the time. It's a great thing for him, keeping, as I say, him active, mobile, supple, and obviously blasting away the cobwebs. He'd been so fed up of having close pass after close pass, he started riding with his camera and started passing the footage to the police whenever he considered that he'd been passed too closely. But on this incident, it wasn't just a close pass, it actually ended up being an accident. So I'll play the video. So he's cycling along and you'll see this van is overtaking him so close that he's caught up in the draft, and that's him over. I want to play that again for you because I want you to see that this van doesn't even cross the white line. It doesn't even breach the white line here as it's overtaking Tommy. So he's got no space at all. I wouldn't even say that that was 50 centimetres, let alone 1.5 metres. And he's left on the road. Luckily, the car behind the van didn't run over him. But what's terrifying is neither car nor the van stopped to help him. And it was traffic behind that were able to come to his aid. And he spent a couple of nights in hospital because of his injuries. It was only because we had this video footage and he was able to pass it to the police, who promptly lost it for 6 months. But when they did find it, they were able to give it to us. Because he had this footage, we were able to identify the the vehicle and the insurers involved. We've got access to a special database, meaning that if we had the registration number for a car or a vehicle, then we can look up the insurers from those details, and we can intimate a claim to those insurers. When we intimate a claim, especially if there's one with video footage, I tend not to say that we have video footage until we have a response back from the insurers. And in this particular case, they came back and said that there was no collision. I agree. The van did not collide with Tommy at all, and there was nothing wrong with what happened. So from there, we were able to show them the footage of what actually happened, and they straight away admitted responsibility. This pass was so close that he was pulled into the backdraft of the van, and that's what's caused him to fall over. So as I say, these dash cams and these, whether it's these helmet mounted cameras for our cyclist clients are wearing, or indeed dash cam footage from other vehicles, it's becoming more and more popular. And we find that an awful lot of accidents are being caught on that. And I'm afraid we've got a bit of a compilation tape here. Oh, here we go. This was the one I was talking about. That was the one I was talking about earlier. My apologies, I've got that wrong order. So this is the one accident in Aberdeen that I was talking about earlier, that the driver said that she was stationary when our client hit her. So it's not that stationary, she just pulled straight across him. So as I say, we get some weird and wonderful excuses from the insurers. The cyclist came out of nowhere. Poof, the cyclist came out of nowhere. The cyclist pulled off the pavement in front of me. The cyclist was riding too fast. The cyclist was riding too slow. The cyclist was not wearing a helmet. What does that matter? It doesn't mean that you're allowed to hit cyclists just because they're not wearing a helmet. There's all sorts of crazy excuses that we get from insurers, and you can believe me when I say I've seen them all at this stage. What we have to do as lawyers, and it's part of our job, is to get evidence in order to refute these excuses or these defences from the insurers, and that might be witness evidence from people that saw the incident, any photographs, which are always helpful. If the police have attended, then we often take statements from police officers if they've attended, and taken statements from people at the scene. And there's all sorts of other things that we can do to investigate and repudiate any defences that are put forward. Most of our cases are against insurers for other vehicles. So if it has been another vehicle or another road user that's obliged to have compulsory insurance, such as cars or vans or lorries, then most of our cases will be against their insurers. However, if it is an uninsured driver, so somebody that's not had insurance, or an untraced driver, such as a hit and run situation, which unfortunately happens much too often, then there is the possibility to make a claim regardless. And that's because something called the MIB, the Motors Insurers Bureau, not the Men in Black, but that is a body funded by the insurance industry and steps in as an insurer of last resort. So if there is no other means by which to make a claim because we're being unable to trace the insurers, or we've been unable, or there is no insurers, then you can still make a claim through the Motors Insurers Bureau for any injuries and, in certain circumstances, damaged items. So it's important if you are involved in an incident, as I say, even if it is a hit and run, even if you are aware that the driver's uninsured, if you do wish to make a claim, do speak to solicitors, because it's something that we might still be able to help with through this MIB claim. I want to speak a little today about road hazards, because it's something that is terribly poignant for cyclists. These road hazards, these potholes, are probably the worst thing, in between sort of scraping dead slugs out of in between your brake calipers. Potholes are probably the worst thing about cycling. There's other road hazards such as gravel on the road, or diesel, or even I think this is bridge expansion joints, which will just be like black ice if they're wet. So even without all the other road users, the road itself can sometimes be dangerous, and particularly dangerous to cyclists and other two-wheeled road users too. So in terms of the roads, in the UK, the roads are either dealt with as trunk roads, which are operated in Scotland by the Scottish ministers or various contractors such as AMI or BAIR Scotland. Or for other roads, it will be the local council for where the road exists. So that roads authority is obliged to inspect and maintain the roads in a reasonable condition. It doesn't mean that they are obliged to know, or they are expected to know, about all hazards all the time, but it does mean that they should be inspecting the roads at a reasonable frequency and responding to any reports of any hazards or any hazards that they observe when they're out doing their inspections. So this is a tweet that came out on Twitter from Cheshire West Council, I think, and they got a bit of stick online for this, because they were trying to explain to their residents about how they inspect the roads. So this is a picture they posted up on their own social media. So Darren, their roads inspector, has a look at this pothole, and he's having a measure. And he's explaining that it's under 50 millimetres and therefore no action can be taken. They took quite a lot of stick for this because Darren's literally standing in the pothole whilst he's measuring it. So he's not exactly measuring it from one side to the other. And he's perhaps if he had his glasses on, then it might be working a bit better. So we're getting lots of memes coming out about that, saying Darren's spirit level says it's fine. But it is a good explanation of what they are expected to do. They are expected to have a look at defects and see if it is at a level which should be intervened and something should be done to fix it, and within what timescale. So the council would go out, they would have a look, they would categorise it according to their operational guides or their operational policies as to how dangerous it is, how likely it is to cause an incident, and what the impact of that incident would be. And they use a matrix or some other scoring system in order to determine whether it should be repaired and under what timescale it should be repaired. This is one of my clients who was out riding with her boyfriend, and she encountered this bit of road out near Galashiels and the borders. And it was one of these bits of road that was just all pothole. So she had seen that there was this bad piece of road ahead of her, and she's trying to find a good route through the defect, and she ended up avoiding one pothole and finding herself in the other. I think certainly I've been in that circumstance. It's not from a lack of looking, it's just that there's no good choices. So she ended up being thrown from her bicycle and having quite a nasty injury to her shoulder. They took photographs at the time, and these are the photographs showing the state of the road. Obviously, neither her nor her boyfriend were cycling around with a tape measure in order to take measurements of the road defect at the time. You're not expected to. But a number of days later, her boyfriend was able to go back with a tape measure and take these photographs. Now, when he went back, he found that the council, and this was a couple of days later, he found that the council were literally there repairing the road as he arrived. So they were, the council workmen were there. They'd literally just put down all this tarmac in various places, and he was able to take photographs and measurements of it as it had been repaired. It had been repaired just as he arrived. When we intimated the claim to the council, their defence was that they were aware that the road was in poor condition. So they were aware that it was like this at the time. And it was already scheduled for repair, and it was due to be repaired. And in fact, it was repaired the day after Tina's accident. But we knew that this wasn't the case, and the records that they had provided to us were fabricated, because when our client's boyfriend arrived a couple of days later to take photographs, he found the works team there making the repairs there and then. We had the date stamped photographs of them, which we were able to send to the insurers, who were quick to admit responsibility and make a full settlement of the claim. So as I say, it's worthwhile taking photographs if you can at the time. If there's especially if there's any road surface hazards that's caused your accident, try and take photographs if you can at the time. I appreciate it's not going to be high up in your priorities if you've been injured. If you can get somebody else to take photographs, if you have something that can be used to measure, again, I don't expect you to be cycling about with a tape measure. I've seen cans of Coke, Mars bars, all sorts of things that can be used as a scale, and that is really helpful if we can have those photographs from the time, because quite often what the council will do is go and repair it later. So it's good to have photographs like this showing the defect at the time. The other thing to say is that, even if you haven't had an accident on a road surface defect, it's worthwhile reporting it to the council. So if you've got a regular route that you ride on, that you use frequently, and you know that there's a bad road defect, if there's a pothole, if there's something dangerous, please report it to the Roads Authority. It's normally your local council or the council where the road is, and most of them, this is one I've just taken from Aberdeen City Council, most of them will have an online reporting form that's relatively straightforward and it's worthwhile using. It means, first of all, for yourself, it's going to get repaired quicker if you let them know about it rather than wait until their next scheduled inspection. If you tell them that there's an issue, a safety issue, then they will be obliged to respond to it. And if they don't, then obviously you can bring them up on that. Or if you've reported it to them and another cyclist has an incident involving that defect, then I can use your report, which I can find through Freedom of Information requests, to show that the council ought to have known about it because it was previously reported to them. So if there's something I can impress on you today, it's to report those potholes. Make it your hobby to report potholes, especially ones on your regular routes, because not only could it make things safer for you, or it could help another cyclist in the future. So if we are able to prove a claim for compensation, if we're able to prove, as I say, that perhaps another road user was to blame for the incident, or perhaps the roads authority were negligent in their duties, then we can make claims for compensation. That would include things like a damaged bicycle, a damaged helmet, kit, that sort of thing. More importantly, of course, compensation for the pain and suffering of your injuries. People are often absent from work as a result of their accident, and that means that they're suffering loss of earnings, and we would want to recover that for them. Sometimes it's not only a loss of earnings until they're able to go back to work. Sometimes their injuries might affect whether they're able to work or the type of work that they're able to do. So we can also look at a future loss of earnings. There might be other expenses that they've had as well. The other thing to think about is rehabilitation. So not only are we looking at, sort of final settlement of a claim, it's also how we can assist in the rehabilitation. Many of our clients with serious injuries will need rehabilitation in order to get them back to the best recovery possible. And that might include things like physiotherapy or counselling. It might include more complex things such as occupational therapy, prosthetics if there's been a loss of limbs, more specialist physiotherapy if there's been spinal injuries. And these are things that can be provided within the context of an insurance claim in addition to what is available on the NHS. Now, the NHS is great, but it's under pressure just now. And quite often, if we're able to get funding from an insurance claim for extra treatments, we can maximise or speed up somebody's recovery as best as possible. And that will often depend on our client's goals. Each client is different. We find our cyclist clients tend to be highly motivated, and they just want back to normal as quickly as possible. They want back to their jobs, they want back on their bike, they want everything as quickly as possible, and we want that for them. And each of our clients' goals are entirely different, entirely individual, and it's important for us that we get to know what our clients want to do, what they need from their recovery in order to put them back into the position that they should have been in had the accident not happened. So I think this is, yep, I'm afraid this is a bit of a bonza roll of some of the incidents that we've been sent from some of our clients. This one cyclist here, keep your eye on. And that was captured by a travelling dash cam. This is one our client was head cam. I don't know how this driver didn't see him. So these are all caught in dash cam or helmet cams. It's helpful to have if you can, right? If you do have one, it's worthwhile using. Don't think that you have to have one or have to have video footage of your incident in order to make a claim, but it is all, of course, useful if you do have them. So if you are involved in an incident, we would always say make sure that it's reported to the police, particularly if you suffered injury. And the Highway Code says, of course, if injury has been caused in a road traffic incident, it should be reported to the police, even if it's all very nice, even if everyone's happy to swap details at the scene. Make sure that you record it with the police. If nothing else, even if you decide not to make a claim, if nothing else, it allows the police to record and use that information for statistics about cyclists. and that might inform policy decisions in the future. Or it might inform, particularly if there's a particular place for, or a hotspot area for cyclist incidents. Unless that data is recorded, then improvements can't be made. It's worthwhile taking photographs from the scene, take a photograph of the other vehicle if it's involved, take a photograph of the defect, if it's a pothole or gravel or something that's caused your accident. And if you can, note the third-party registration number. So if it's been another vehicle involved, then you can note the registration number of that. So we've been involved in a number of campaigns.
Every day we are contacted.
Sorry. And one of our campaigns was this Light Up campaign. So we've been providing Police Scotland with some free lights in order to give people who have been found to be cycling without any lights on. So you'll see this in cities everywhere. So unfortunately, people, I call them ninja cyclists. They're all in black, no lights on anywhere. So we've been providing Police Scotland with, I think it's 1,000 pairs of front and back lights that they can provide out to people that have been found to have inadequate or absent lighting. So thanks very much for sitting in, especially on a Friday, and hearing from me. I'm very happy to hear from people with questions, because it's much more interesting than me being by myself. Does anyone have any questions about what I do that I can help with? You can pop it in the chat or...
Hi, Roz, it's me.
Oh. Hi there.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Cool. I just have a couple of questions regarding, like, for example, so what's the meaning of the traffic signals when cycling, and also what will happen for a cyclist if they don't respect the traffic lights correctly?
So what's the meaning of the traffic signs?
Yeah, in law, yes.
Which signs do you mean? Are you meaning like the red lights on?
Lights.
Yeah. So example, the red if you're cycling on the road, those traffic lights apply to you as the cyclist just as they would if you were driving a car. So if you go through a red light, you can be charged by the police exactly the same as if you were driving a car. So it is important, and I should say that's my lights flickering, so I'm not entirely clear my electricity is going to stay on. So if if everything goes dark, then it's because my internet's gone. I think it's really important as a cyclist, but I don't want to say that you represent all cyclists, but cyclists get a bad name for going through red lights. And it's important that you do respect the red lights exactly the same as if you were driving a car, for your own safety, for other people's safety, and also, as I say, a representative of the community. So let's all keep to red lights. They're there for a reason.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And the other questions will be like, so what the law says about wearing a helmet.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, so if someone has an accident without a helmet.
Yeah. So the law in Scotland, and in fact in the UK, you are not obliged to wear a helmet. You can wear a helmet. It's a really good idea to wear a helmet, but you're not obliged to wear a helmet. If you are involved in an accident that where your injuries could have been lessened or avoided by wearing a helmet, then the other side can argue, and it's for them to argue and for them to prove on a medical basis that your injuries would have been lessened or avoided by wearing a helmet. And if that is the case, then the amount of compensation could be reduced because of that. So, for example, if I wasn't wearing a helmet and a driver knocked me off and I hurt my elbow, then whether I was wearing a helmet or not makes not a blind bit of difference to whether I hurt my elbow. So there's no change in, you know, what I'd be entitled to, nor is there ever any change about whether you're entitled to compensation. It's just about the amount. The difference might be, for example, if I was that same accident, I was not wearing a helmet and I had a small concussion that might have been lessened or avoided by me wearing a helmet. The other side cannot say that they were not responsible for the accident. They still can't hit me just because I'm not wearing a helmet. But the amount of compensation that they might be entitled to can be reduced because if I had been wearing a helmet, the injuries might have been lessened or avoided. The same argument actually applies for seat belts.
Okay.
Although seat belts are law.
Right. And my last question is, like, what are the important aspects when hiring a cycle insurance? Do you have any advice on that?
Okay, so cycle insurance, you're not obliged to have insurance as a cyclist. So it's not like driving a car or a van or a lorry. There is no compulsory insurance for riding a bike. There's lots of good reasons behind that, I think, and personally, I would agree with that situation staying the same as it is. As a cyclist, you're rarely going to cause harm to anyone else. You are vulnerable as a cyclist, and it's rare that you're going to cause harm to anyone else. And the situation is quite different if you're driving a car. Driving a car is a privilege, and you know you are at risk of causing. You know, if you do something stupid, you're going to cause harm to somebody else if you're driving a car. It's rare that that's the case when you're a cyclist. So as I say, you're not obliged to have compulsory insurance. A lot of people do decide to have insurance, and that might be through their own house insurance. Often if you have contents insurance, it might include public liability insurance. Or if there's some membership of Cycling UK, British Cycling, Triathlon Scotland, that might include public liability insurance. So if you were to run over a pedestrian when you're riding your bike and cause them injury, then that their claim would be covered by your own insurance. As I say, that's a choice for yourself if you wish to do so. British Cycling, Cycling UK, Triathlon Scotland, and often your own house insurance will cover that. That is quite separate to insuring your own bike. So a lot of people might want to insure their own bike because it's expensive. Bikes have gone, the only thing rising faster than the price of food is the price of bikes at the moment. So it seems to have their own RPI. But if you wanted to insure your own bike, there's lots of places that will have standalone insurance policies, or you might be able to cover it under your own house insurance, but you should check that if your house insurance does cover your bicycle in the event of theft or damage. A lot of the standalone policies will include public liability insurance if that's something that you decide that you want to have.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Do we have any more questions I can help with?
Actually, yeah, I do, please.
Of course.
It's Kerry. I've just come back from a charity cycle across Kenya.
Oh, congratulations. That sounds lovely.
Yeah, amazing. It was organised by a well-known charity. It's the fourth one I've done for them. But there were actually an awful lot of injuries on day one. Thankfully, not myself personally, as they put us on a very, very inappropriate site in which to test out the bikes. So all ladies, all probably maybe the youngest 25 up to sort of 68. And they gave us the bikes and put us on a professional BMX track to try them out. Now, fortunately, it sounds very strange. My bike had no brakes, so I couldn't actually go out on the bike on that BMX track. But there were a lot of people who sustained an awful lot of injuries.
I'm not surprised. It seems like a bit of a bonkers way to start things, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was really a very bad decision on their part. But there are lots of people who have still got injuries, people needing, they've lost teeth and who have still got double vision because they've damaged cranial nerves, all sorts of things. And just really wondered what your take is on that. Obviously, I appreciate it's probably they could potentially go back to the charity to go, you know.
Yeah, that would be
the-
complex because we'd need more information, as to be quite frank, and I'd be happy to speak to you about that offline if you wanted, because generally the law that applies is the law of the land. So if you're in Kenya, did you say it was?
Yeah,
Then the law that would apply would be the negligence and the breach of duty, and the duty of care that would apply would be that of Kenyan law, and I don't know what that is. That sort of circumstance, and I've dealt with a very similar case that happened in Scotland that was successful, and it was a group of ladies in their and they would say we're a group of middle-aged ladies, as they had described themselves, and they were invited to take part in a mountain bike course and given full suspension mountain bikes and told to go and jump things in the car park, and that was task number one. And they had no idea what they were doing. I didn't have a clue what I was doing either, and one had fallen off and broken her ankle, and we were able to make a claim. Whether that same standard would apply in Kenya, I do not know. And that would be a question for Kenyan lawyers. The more complex item is if it's arranged through almost like a holiday deal through the UK, then there's potential to found a claim against your tour operators, almost, if that's how it's been dealt with, but we need to have more information. So potentially, but it would certainly need more information about that. So very happy if you wanted to pop me an email or give me a phone about that afterwards.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, so unless there's any other questions, thank you all very much for coming along. I hope you all have a little bit drier of an evening than I do, because it is wild out there just now here. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.
Bye.